Your husband is one of the most powerful men in the country, and you don't remember him at all. The words land softly, almost gently, but they echo like something far heavier in Clara Bennett's mind as her eyes slowly open to a ceiling too white, too perfect, too unfamiliar to belong to any life she remembers. And for a moment, she just lies there, listening to the faint hum of machines and the distant rhythm of footsteps in a hallway that feels miles away. Her fingers twitching against crisp hospital sheets as if searching for something. Anything that feels like hers, but there is nothing. Not a memory, not a name, not even a fragment of how she got here, just a hollow silence where her past should be. And then she turns her head slightly, and that's when she sees him, standing by the window like he owns the light itself, tall, composed, dressed in a charcoal suit so perfectly tailored it looks like it was made for a man who never makes mistakes, his posture still, his expression unreadable. And yet there's something in the way he watches her that feels measured, like he's calculating more than he's feeling. "Clara," he says, his voice low, controlled, the kind of voice that doesn't need to be loud to command attention, and she blinks at him, confused, because the name sounds like it should belong to her, but it doesn't feel like it does. Not yet, not fully. "You're awake," he adds, stepping closer, each movement deliberate, as if even walking toward her is part of a decision he's already made long before she opened her eyes. "Who are you?" she whispers, her voice dry, fragile, and the question hangs between them longer than it should, long enough that something shifts in his gaze, just for a second, something almost human, almost uncertain, but then it's gone, replaced by that same calm control. "I'm your husband," he says, simply, as if stating a fact that cannot be questioned, and something in Clara's chest tightens, not because she remembers him, but because she doesn't, because there's no warmth, no flicker of recognition. Nothing that connects her to this man who claims such a permanent place in her life. And yet everything around her, the private room, the quiet efficiency of the nurse who briefly steps in and nods respectfully toward him, the way the doctor addresses him with a tone just shy of deference, suggests that his words carry weight, real weight, the kind that shapes reality whether she understands it or not. "Husband?" she repeats softly, tasting the word like it's foreign, like it belongs to someone else's story, and he nods once, slipping his hands into his pockets, his gaze never leaving her. "We've been married for 8 months. He continues, his tone steady, but there's something beneath it now, something she can't quite name, something that doesn't match the story he's telling, and Clara's eyes drift past him for a moment, catching the reflection in the glass behind him, a faint image of herself lying in the bed, pale, fragile, a stranger in her own life, and then back to him, searching his face for something real, something she can hold on to. But all she finds is perfection, control, and a distance that shouldn't exist between two people who are supposed to share everything. "I don't remember you," she admits, and for the first time, there's a pause, a real one, not just silence, but a crack in whatever composure he's built around himself. So brief it could almost be imagined, but it's there, and when he speaks again, his voice is softer, quieter. "I know," he says, and the way he says it feels less like comfort and more like confirmation. Like this is exactly how things were always meant to unfold. And Clara feels it then, not a memory, not yet, but a feeling, subtle and unsettling, like stepping into a room where something important already happened before you arrived, like being handed a story where the first chapters have been torn out. And as she looks at the man who claims to be her husband, the man who seems to hold all the answers she's missing, one thought presses quietly, persistently at the edges of her mind. If he really is her husband, why does it feel like she's just been placed into a role she never chose? The ride from the hospital feels longer than it should, even though the city outside the tinted windows moves with quiet efficiency, streetlights passing in soft golden streaks as Clara sits beside Alexander in the back of a sleek black car that hums almost silently along the road, her hands folded tightly in her lap, as if holding herself together, her eyes drifting from the unfamiliar skyline to the reflection staring back at her in the glass, trying to find recognition in anything, but finding none, not in the buildings, not in the passing faces, not even in the man sitting inches away from her who claims to be her husband, and the silence between them is not empty. It is heavy, filled with unspoken things she cannot reach yet. You do not have to try so hard, Alexander says suddenly, his voice calm, breaking the quiet without looking at her, as if he already knows what she is doing, and Clara blinks, turning slightly toward him. Try what? She asks, her voice careful, and he finally glances at her, his expression composed, almost distant. To remember, he replies, simply. The doctors said it may take time, or it may not come back at all. And something about the way he says it feels rehearsed, like a line he has already accepted, maybe even prepared for, and Clara nods slowly, though the idea unsettles her more than she wants to admit, because if her memories never return, then this life, this marriage, this man beside her, they are all she has, whether they feel real or not, and the thought settles uneasily in her chest as the car slows, turning through a set of tall iron gates that open without hesitation, revealing a private drive lined with perfectly trimmed hedges and soft ground lights that lead up to a towering glass and stone penthouse building that looks less like a home and more like a place where decisions are made, important ones, the kind that shape lives. And as the car comes to a smooth stop, a uniformed attendant steps forward immediately, opening the door with quiet respect. Welcome home, Mr. Kane, he says, and Clara notices the way everyone addresses him, not casually, not even warmly, but carefully, like every word matters, and Alexander steps out first, then turns slightly toward her, offering his hand, and for a brief second she hesitates, not because she does not understand the gesture, but because it feels too intimate for someone she does not know, and yet she takes it anyway, her fingers brushing against his, and his grip is steady, warm, real, grounding in a way she does not expect, and it unsettles her even more than the distance did. The elevator ride is silent, smooth, rising higher and higher until the doors open directly into a space that steals the air from her lungs. Floor-to-ceiling windows revealing the entire city stretching out below, lights flickering like stars. Caught beneath glass, the interior pristine, modern, everything in its place as if nothing here is ever accidental. This is where we live, Alexander says, stepping inside as if it is nothing extraordinary. And Clara follows slowly, her gaze moving across the room. The furniture, the art, the details that all whisper the same thing. This is his world, not hers, not yet. And then something catches her eye. A small table near the window, a framed photograph, and without thinking she walks toward it, drawn by something she cannot explain, her heart picking up just slightly as she reaches for it, lifting the frame carefully, expecting to see something that will make sense of everything, something that will confirm what he said, but instead she freezes, her breath catching, because the woman in the photo looks like her, the same face, the same eyes, but the expression is different, softer, almost uncertain, and beside her stands Alexander, his arm resting lightly at her back, his expression just as controlled as it is now. But there is something else in the image, something subtle but undeniable, a distance, even there, even in what is supposed to be a memory of their life together. And Clara slowly lowers the frame, turning to look at him, her voice quiet but steady. We do not look like people who are in love, she says, and for the first time since she woke up, something shifts in Alexander's expression, something that cannot quite be hidden, and he takes a step closer, his gaze locking onto hers. That is because, he says slowly, his voice lower now, heavier with something real, we were not supposed to be. Clara stands there for a moment, the weight of his words settling. Slowly, uncomfortably, as if they belonged to a truth she was never meant to hear this soon. Her fingers still lightly gripping the edge of the picture frame before she carefully places it back down, her eyes not leaving Alexander, searching his face for something more, something that explains why a man would marry someone he was not supposed to love. Then why did we get married? She asks quietly, and her voice is steady. But there is something beneath it now, something sharper, a need to understand the life she has been placed into. And Alexander exhales slowly, turning slightly away from her, as if the question requires distance, not because he does not have an answer, but because the answer itself is something he chooses carefully. It was an agreement, he says, his tone returning to that controlled calm. A contract. And the word lands differently than she expects, colder, more deliberate. And Clara feels a subtle shift inside her, as if something invisible has just been named, something that explains the distance she sensed in the photograph. A contract, she repeats, almost to herself, trying to connect it to something, anything. But there is no memory to attach it to, only the feeling that it changes everything. What kind of contract? She asks, and this time he looks at her directly. No hesitation, no avoidance. A marriage for appearances, he replies. Public events, business obligations, stability for both of us. And Clara blinks, her mind trying to keep up. So we are not really married? She asks, and for a moment, something almost like frustration flickers in his expression, quick, restrained. Legally, we are, he says, but it was never meant to be anything more than that. And the room feels quieter after that. The city lights outside stretching endlessly beyond the glass as Clara processes the reality of what he is telling her, that she agreed to this, that she chose this life, a life where love was never part of the equation, and yet she cannot remember making that choice, cannot remember the version of herself who would sign something like that. Why would I agree to something like that? She asks, more to herself than to him. But Alexander hears it anyway, his gaze lingering on her longer than before, as if weighing how much to say. You needed something, he answers finally. And so did I. And the simplicity of it feels incomplete, like a sentence missing its most important piece. And Clara takes a slow breath, her eyes drifting again across the room, trying to see it differently now, not as a home, but as a place she once entered with a purpose, a deal, a transaction, and then something catches her attention again. Not the photograph this time, but a small object resting on the table beside it, a thin leather folder, partially tucked beneath a stack of documents, and something about it draws her in the same quiet, persistent way, like a whisper she cannot ignore, and before she can stop herself, she steps closer, her fingers brushing against the edge of it. What is this? She asks, lifting it slightly, and Alexander moves quickly then, not aggressively, but decisively, closing the distance between them. In 2 smooth steps, his hand coming down over the folder before she can open it, his grip firm, his presence suddenly much closer than before, and Clara freezes, not out of fear, but out of surprise at the shift in him, the first real reaction she has seen. That is nothing you need to worry about right now, he says, his voice lower, tighter than it has been all night, and Clara looks up at him, her brows drawing together slightly, because now she knows, instinctively, that whatever is inside, that folder matters, maybe more than anything else he has told her so far. If it is nothing, she says slowly, her voice calm but no longer uncertain, then why do you not want me to see it? And for a moment, they just stand there, the space between them charged with something new, something no longer distant or controlled, and Alexander studies her, really studies her this time, as if trying to decide whether the woman standing in front of him now is the same one who signed that contract months ago, or someone entirely different. And when he finally speaks, his voice is quieter, but heavier with truth than before, because, he says, if you read that, you might not want to stay. Clara does not step back, even though everything in that moment tells her she probably should, because the way Alexander's hand presses down on the folder, the way his voice shifts, the way the air between them tightens, it all confirms something she is only beginning to understand, that this life she woke up into is not simple, not clean, and definitely not honest, and instead of fear, what rises inside her is something quieter but stronger. Curiosity mixed with a growing sense that she deserves more than half answers and controlled truths. Then maybe I need to know, she says, her voice steady, her eyes holding his. And for a brief second, something almost like conflict crosses his face. Not anger, not even frustration, but hesitation. The kind that comes when a decision has already been made, but does not feel as certain anymore. And he studies her like he is trying to find the woman he remembers. The one who agreed to his terms. The one who signed that contract without looking back. But the woman standing in front of him now is different. She is not bound by memory, not restrained by whatever deal they made. And that makes her unpredictable in a way he is not used to. You are not ready for it, he says finally, but his voice lacks the authority it had before, and Clara notices that. She notices everything now, the slight pause, the careful choice of words, The way he does not say she cannot see it, only that she should not, and that difference matters. You do not get to decide that, she replies, not raising her voice, not pushing, just stating something simple and undeniable. And that is when he exhales, slowly, as if releasing something he has been holding onto for longer than this moment, his hand loosening slightly on the folder, not moving away, but no longer blocking it completely, and for a second, neither of them moves. The city lights reflecting faintly across the glass walls around them, turning the space into something almost surreal, like they are suspended above everything else, caught in a moment that could change everything. And then Alexander steps back, just half a step, enough to create space, enough to show that he is no longer stopping her, but not enough to suggest he is comfortable with what comes next, and Clara feels it immediately. The shift, the permission, and with a slow breath, she reaches forward again, her fingers brushing against the leather, her pulse steady but present as she opens the folder, expecting something complicated, something technical, something she will have to piece together. But what she finds is painfully simple, a contract, clean, precise. Her name printed clearly at the top beside his, the terms laid out in language that leaves no room for interpretation, a marriage for 1 year, appearances required at specified events, confidentiality mandatory, emotional involvement explicitly discouraged, and Clara's eyes moved down the page slowly, absorbing each line, each condition, each boundary that defined a relationship that was never meant to feel real. And then she sees it, near the bottom, her signature, written in ink that looks firm, certain, like the person who signed it knew exactly what she was doing. And for a moment, Clara just stares at it, because that version of herself feels like a stranger, someone she cannot reach, someone who made a choice she does not remember making, and yet has to live with now. And when she finally looks up, her gaze meeting Alexander's again, there is no confusion in her eyes this time, only clarity, quiet and sharp. "You said I needed something," she says, her voice calm. "But there is an edge to it now. What was it?" And Alexander does not answer. Immediately, his jaw tightening slightly as if the question is heavier than the contract itself. And when he finally speaks, his voice is lower, more honest than before. "Protection," he says, and Clara's brows draw together just slightly. "From what?" she asks, and this time, he does not look away, does not soften it, does not hide behind control. "From losing everything," he replies, and the words linger between them, heavier than anything else he has said, because they suggest something more, something deeper than a simple agreement, something that ties her to him in ways she does not yet understand. And Clara feels it then, not a memory, but a certainty, that whatever brought her into this contract, whatever made her sign that page with such confidence, it was not just about money or convenience. It was about survival. And as she closes the folder slowly, her fingers tightening slightly around the edge, one thought settles firmly in her mind, clear and unshakable. If she needed protection, then someone, somewhere, was the reason she needed it in the first place. Clara does not move right away after closing the folder, her fingers still resting lightly against the leather as if letting go of it too quickly might make everything she just read disappear. But it does not disappear. It stays, sharp and clear in her mind, the contract, the signature, the word protection echoing louder than anything else. And slowly she lifts her gaze back to Alexander, studying him differently now, not as a stranger who claims to be her husband, but as a man who holds pieces of her past she cannot reach. "You said I was going to lose everything," she says quietly, her voice steady but searching. "What does that mean?" And Alexander stands there for a moment, his expression unreadable again, but there is tension in the way his shoulders hold, in the slight tightening of his jaw. Like this is the part he cannot reduce to simple answers. "It means you were in a position where staying alone would have cost you more than you were willing to lose," he replies, careful, measured, and Clara tilts her head slightly, her eyes narrowing just enough to show she hears what he is not saying. "That is not an answer," she says, not accusing, just stating. And for a second, something almost like a quiet frustration flickers in his eyes, not directed at her, but at the situation itself, as if he has already had this conversation before, just not with this version of her. "You were being pushed out," he says finally, his voice lower now, less guarded. business, assets, influence, everything tied to your name was being taken piece by piece. And Clara feels something shift inside her, not a memory, but a reaction, something instinctive, like her body recognizes the weight of those words even if her mind does not. By who? She asks, and this time, Alexander does not answer right away, his gaze drifting briefly toward the city beyond the glass before returning to her. And that hesitation tells her more than any immediate response could. People who benefit when you are not in control, he says, and Clara lets out a slow breath, her fingers curling slightly at her sides as the pieces begin to form something larger, something more dangerous than she expected. And marrying you stopped that, she presses, and Alexander nods once. It shifted the balance, he says. No one moves against something they cannot easily break. And Clara almost lets out a small, disbelieving breath at that, not because it is illogical, but because it means she did not just marry him for convenience. She used him, or at least she made a calculated decision that tied her safety to his power, and the realization is both unsettling and strangely grounding at the same time, because it tells her that whoever she was before, she was not weak, she was strategic, even if she cannot remember it. So, I chose you, she says slowly, more to herself than to him, and Alexander's gaze sharpened slightly at that. Like the wording matters. Yes, he says, you did. And there is something in the way he says it that carries more weight than agreement, something closer to acknowledgement, maybe even respect, and Clara walks slowly toward the window, her reflection faint against the glass as the city stretches endlessly below, trying to imagine the version of herself who made that choice, who walked into his world and signed that contract without hesitation. And for a moment, she wonders if that woman would even recognize who she is now, standing here with no memory, no certainty, only questions. And what did you get out of it? She asks without turning around, her voice softer now, but no less direct, and behind her, there is a pause, longer this time, heavier, and when Alexander answers, his voice is quieter than it has been since she woke up, stripped of some of that control he wears so easily. Leverage, he says, but then after a brief moment, almost like the word is not enough, he adds, and something I did not expect. And Clara turns at that, her brows drawing together slightly, because that is the first time he has said anything that does not sound like part of the agreement. What is that? She asks, and for a second, his gaze holds hers in a way that feels different, less calculated, more uncertain, like he is deciding whether to say something he has not planned to say. And then he looks away, just slightly, breaking that moment before it can become something more. That is not part of the contract, he replies, returning to the distance that defined everything between them before, but it is too late, because Clara has already seen it, that small shift, that brief crack in his control, and she knows now, with a certainty she cannot explain, that whatever this arrangement started as, whatever reasons brought them together, something changed along the way, something that was never written in that contract. And as she stands there, looking at the man who was supposed to be nothing more than protection, one quiet, persistent question settles in her mind. If he gained something he never expected, then what exactly did she mean to him before she forgot everything? The silence that follows his answer does not feel empty anymore. It feels layered, like there are things beneath the surface neither of them is ready to say out loud. And Clara stands there for a moment longer, watching him as he looks away, as if that brief honesty cost him more than he intended to give. And something about that lingers with her, not as a memory, but as a feeling she cannot ignore. And instead of pressing him further, she turns back toward the window, her reflection faint against the glass, trying to steady herself in a reality that keeps shifting with every answer he gives. Because nothing about this feels simple anymore. Not the contract, not the marriage, not even the man himself. And after a moment, she speaks again, her voice quieter now, less confrontational, but still searching. What was I like? She asks, and behind her, there is a pause, a subtle one, but she hears it. And when he answers, his voice carries something different, something softer than before. You were precise, he says, choosing the word carefully. You did not waste time. You did not ask unnecessary questions. You knew what you wanted. And Clara lets out a small breath at that, almost a quiet laugh without humor, because it feels so far from who she is now, standing here unsure of everything. That does not sound like me, she says, and this time, when she turns back to face him, there is something almost vulnerable in her expression, not weakness, but honesty, and Alexander studies her for a moment, longer than before, as if comparing the woman in front of him to the one he remembers, and for the first time, there is no immediate answer, only a quiet observation. You are not the same, he admits, and the words land gently, but they carry weight, because they confirm what she already feels, that whatever she was before, whatever choices she made, that version of her is gone for now, replaced by someone who has to rebuild everything from nothing, and Clara nods slowly, absorbing that, accepting it in a way that feels strangely grounding, because if she is not the same, then maybe she is not bound by the same decisions either. Then maybe I get to choose differently now, she says, almost to herself. But the moment the words leave her lips, she sees the reaction in him, subtle, controlled, but undeniable. Something tightens in his expression, something that was not there before, and it is gone just as quickly, replaced by that familiar calm. But she notices it. She notices everything now, and it tells her more than any explanation could. And for a moment, neither of them speaks, the distance between them shifting again, no longer just physical, but something more complicated, something that neither of them fully understands yet. And then Clara takes a small step forward, closing part of that space, not out of confidence, but out of something quieter, a need to understand the man standing in front of her beyond the contract, beyond the control. If this was just a deal, she says softly, her eyes holding his, then why did you stay? And the question hangs there, simple, direct, impossible to deflect without revealing something real, and Alexander's gaze sharpens slightly, not in defense, but in focus, as if this is the question he has been avoiding, the one he cannot answer with logic or terms or agreements. And for a second, he says nothing, his jaw tightening just slightly, his eyes searching hers as if trying to decide whether she is ready for whatever truth he could give. And then he exhales, slowly, the sound almost imperceptible, but the shift in him unmistakable. And when he finally speaks, his voice is lower, stripped of its usual distance. Because leaving was not as simple as I expected, he says, and Clara feels something move inside her at that, something small but undeniable, because it is not a full answer, not yet, but it is real, more real than anything he has said so far. And as she stands there, looking at him, feeling the quiet tension between what was agreed and what is no longer so clear, one thought settles into place, steady and certain, whatever this started as, whatever rules defined it before. They are already beginning to break, and neither of them knows what happens when they do. The city outside continues to glow, indifferent to whatever is unfolding inside the penthouse. But for Clara, everything feels sharper now, more defined, like each word, each pause, each look carries meaning she cannot ignore anymore. And she watches Alexander closely, not just listening to what he says, but to what he avoids, to the spaces between his answers, because those spaces are starting to feel louder than the words themselves. And slowly, she takes another step forward, closing the distance just enough that the air between them changes again, less distant, more real. Not as simple as you expected, she repeats softly, as if testing the weight of his answer. That sounds like a choice, not an obligation. And for a moment, Alexander does not respond, his gaze fixed on her with an intensity that feels different now, less guarded, more conflicted, and she can see it, even if he tries to hide it. The subtle shift in his posture, the way his shoulders are no longer perfectly composed, like something inside him is no longer aligning with the control he usually maintains so effortlessly. It was both, he says finally, his voice steady but quieter. Things changed, and Clara tilts her head slightly, her eyes narrowing just enough to show she is not going to accept vague answers anymore. Not now. Not after everything she has learned. Then tell me what changed, she says, not demanding, just asking in a way that leaves no room to retreat. And this time, the silence stretches longer, not empty, but heavy, filled with something that feels almost like hesitation, like he is standing at the edge of something he cannot easily step back from once he crosses it. And when he finally speaks, his voice is lower than before, stripped of that careful distance. You stopped acting like it was just a contract, he says, And the words land differently. Not dramatic, not exaggerated, just simple. And because of that, they feel more real, and Clara feels something tighten in her chest at that. Not a memory, but a reaction she cannot fully explain. "What does that mean?" she asks quietly. And Alexander's gaze holds hers for a moment longer before he looks away, just slightly, like. The answer is not something he is used to saying out loud. "You questioned things," he continues. "You challenged me. You refused to follow rules that did not make sense to you." And he pauses briefly, his jaw tightening just enough to show this part matters. "You made it difficult to keep things distant." And Clara's breath slows at that, her mind trying to catch up to the image he is describing, a version of herself she cannot remember, but one that feels closer to who she is now than the cold, calculated person he described before. And for the first time, she feels something like connection to that past version of herself, not through memory, but through understanding. "So I changed," she says softly, more as a realization than a question, and Alexander nods once, his gaze returning to her, more direct now, less guarded. "Yes," he says, "you did." And the simplicity of it carries more weight than anything else, because it means that whatever this arrangement started as, it did not stay that way. It evolved, shifted, became something neither of them planned. And Clara takes a slow breath, absorbing that, letting it settle into the growing picture forming in her mind. And then she asks the question that has been building quietly beneath everything else. "And you?" she says, her voice barely above a whisper now, but steady. "Did you change too?" And for a moment, everything stills, the city, the lights, the space between them, and Alexander looks at her in a way he has not before, not as someone fulfilling a role, not as someone tied to a contract, but as someone who sees through the surface, someone who is asking for something real. And for the first time, he does not answer immediately, because this question is different. It does not ask for facts or explanations. It asks for truth. And when he finally speaks, his voice is quieter than it has ever been, almost like the words are not meant to be heard beyond this moment. "I was not supposed to," he says, and Clara feels that answer more than she understands it, because it is not a denial. It is not even an admission. It is something in between, something unresolved. And as she stands there, looking at him, feeling the weight of everything they are not saying, one thing becomes clear in a way she cannot ignore anymore. Whatever they had before she lost her memory, it was no longer just a contract, and whatever it is now, it is only getting harder to pretend that it still is. The air between them does not settle after his answer. It shifts, becoming something heavier, something neither of them can easily step away from now. And Clara feels it in the quiet way her breath slows, in the way her thoughts no longer scatter but begin to align into something sharper, more deliberate, because what he said was not a denial. And what he did not say matters even more, and she watches him carefully, noticing how he holds himself now, not as untouchable as before, not as distant, but still controlled enough to keep whatever truth sits beneath the surface from fully rising. And for a moment she says nothing, letting the silence stretch just enough to make it impossible to ignore. "You were not supposed to," she repeats softly, her voice calm but steady. "But you did." And it is not a question. It is a conclusion, and Alexander's gaze shifts slightly at that, not away, but deeper, like he is deciding whether to correct her or accept what she already understands, and the hesitation itself becomes the answer. And Clara feels something settle inside her, not comfort, not clarity, but certainty, the kind that does not need proof. "That is why you did not tell me the truth," she continues, her voice still even. But there is something firmer in it now. Something that was not there before. "You could have told me everything when I woke up. The contract, the deal, all of it. But you did not." And Alexander's jaw tightens slightly, the smallest reaction, but she sees it. "You let me believe I was your wife without telling me what that really meant," she adds. And now there is no hesitation in her words, only quiet precision, the same precision he once used to describe her. And for the first time, the roles feel less defined, less controlled, like she is no longer the one trying to catch up, and he is no longer the one entirely in control. "I told you what mattered," he says finally, his voice steady, but lower than before, and Clara shakes her head slightly, not in disagreement, but in understanding. "No," she replies softly. You told me what kept me here, and that lands heavier than anything else she has said, because it is not accusation, it is realization. And for a moment, Alexander says nothing, his gaze fixed on her in a way that feels almost unguarded, almost like he is seeing her clearly for the first time since she woke up, not as someone who forgot, but as someone who is beginning to understand. And Clara takes a slow step back, creating just a little space between them, not to distance herself, but to steady the shift in everything she is feeling, because this is no longer just about the past. It is about what is happening now, what he is choosing now. You said I needed protection, she continues, her voice quieter, but more focused. But you are not protecting me from anything right now. And Alexander's expression changes slightly at that. Not defensive, but alert, like he is trying to anticipate where she is going. And Clara meets his gaze fully, not backing away from it. You are protecting something else, she says, and there is no doubt in her voice now. Only quiet certainty, yourself. And the word lingers between them, sharp but not cruel. And for the first time, Alexander does not immediately respond, not because he does not have an answer, but because the truth is too close to what she just said, and Clara sees it, not in what he says, but in what he cannot, and something shifts inside her again, not anger, not fear, but clarity, because whatever this was before, whatever deal they made, whatever feelings may or may not have existed, it no longer matters in the same way, because now, she is here without memory, without obligation, without the version of herself who signed that contract. And that means something has changed, something fundamental. If I choose to leave, she says slowly, her voice steady, there is nothing in that contract that can stop me anymore. And Alexander's eyes sharpen at that, not in anger, but in something deeper, something that looks dangerously close to concern, and Clara watches him closely, because this is the moment where everything shifts, where the control he has held on to begins to slip, even if just slightly. And for a second, the silence stretches again, but this time it feels different, heavier, more fragile, like whatever happens next will define everything that comes after. And Clara holds his gaze, waiting, not for a command, not for a rule, but for something real, something honest. Because for the first time since she woke up, she realizes that the next move is not his to make. It is hers, and whatever he says now will not be about the contract anymore. It will be about the truth he has been avoiding all along. The moment stretches between them, fragile and unguarded, and Clara does not look away, not this time, because she already understands that whatever happens next will not come from the contract, not from the past, but from what he chooses now. And for the first time since she woke up, Alexander does not hide behind silence or careful words. He does not step back into control. Instead, he stands there, facing her fully, as if the space between them has finally become too small to hold everything. He has been holding back, and when he speaks, his voice is not sharp, not distant, but steady in a way that feels different, real. You are right, he says, and the words land without resistance, without deflection, and Clara feels the shift immediately, because this is not the man who measured every answer. This is someone who has stopped trying to maintain the illusion. I could have told you everything, he continues, his gaze locked onto hers. The contract, the terms, what this was supposed to be, but I did not. And there is no excuse in his voice. No attempt to justify it. Only acknowledgement, and Clara's breath slows as she listens, because this is the truth she has been waiting for, not the facts, but the reason behind them. Why? She asks quietly, and this time, the question is not sharp, it is not a challenge, it is something softer, something that asks for honesty instead of answers. And Alexander exhales slowly, the sound almost unnoticeable, but the change in him undeniable. Because if you knew everything, he says, his voice lower now, almost unguarded, you would have seen this exactly for what it was, and you would have walked away. And Clara feels something tighten in her chest at that, not because she disagrees, but because she understands, and for a moment, neither of them moves, the city outside still glowing beneath them, unchanged, distant, while everything inside this space has shifted completely. And that mattered to you, she asks, her voice barely above a whisper, and Alexander does not hesitate this time, not even for a second. Yes, he says, And the simplicity of it carries more weight than anything else he could have said, because there is no contract in that answer, no condition, no calculation, only truth. And Clara searches his face, looking for anything that contradicts it, anything that makes it less real, but she finds nothing, only the same man she has been trying to understand, finally standing without the distance he built around himself. And slowly, she takes a breath, letting everything settle, the contract, the past, the version of herself she does not remember, the version of him she is only now beginning to see. And then she steps closer again, not out of obligation, not because of the agreement they once made, but because she chooses to, and the difference matters more than anything else. You said I needed protection, she says softly, her eyes holding his. But you are the one who changed the terms. And Alexander watches her carefully, as if every word she says now carries weight he cannot ignore. And she continues, her voice steady, clear. You turned something simple into something complicated, and you did not tell me. And for a moment, he does not respond, not because he disagrees, but because there is nothing to argue. And Clara lets the silence sit there, not uncomfortable, but full. And then she adds quietly, but I am here now. And the words shift everything again, because they are not about the past. They are about the present, about what she is choosing despite everything she does not know. And Alexander's gaze softens slightly at that, not losing its intensity, but losing some of its distance. You are, he says, and there is something different in the way he says it, something that does not belong to a contract, something that belongs to this moment. And Clara nods once, slowly, as if confirming it not just to him, but to herself. And then she says the words that finally break whatever remains of the line between what was agreed and what is real. Then this time, there is no contract, and the meaning settles between them, clear and undeniable. And for the